Welcome back to Bookview TV. Now, this week we've been talking with Out in the Army, My Life as a Gay Soldier author James Wharton. Now, James, you returned home from Iraq. You're still in a relationship, but you're still hurting from the original loss of the relationship with Thom. And you seem to be going through the motions, and yet you were back in Wrexham when Thom had a big birthday celebration, and the two of you reconnected. Talk about how things ended with this other gentleman, in some ways the same way with you being dumped when partner Thom dropped you. What happened there?
Well, 2 years passed in between Thom and I breaking up, and then Thom and I re-meeting, and then eventually rekindling our love. And in that time, I had absolutely no idea that Thom and I would ever talk to each other again or meet each other again. So my life moved on, and during them 2 years, I had the time in Canada and the time with Prince Harry. And then after that, I came back from Canada, and for about 7 or 8 months, I started a relationship with a very nice young man called Ryan. And he was wonderful. It was a great relationship, but there were just a number of things that didn't quite work with Ryan in my relationship, and unfortunately, I guess for Ryan, we broke up. Obviously, that's terrible, but it was because Thom had just re-emerged into my life purely by chance. We both found ourselves in North Wales at the same time. Thom was celebrating his 21st birthday, and by pure chance, we started conversation. And I knew, really, that it was going to be the beginning of our previous relationship being sorted, and us then rekindling our love for each other. And the downside to that, of course, was that my relationship with Ryan had to end, and it was incredibly sad, but definitely really not fair and difficult for Ryan, I guess. And I've always wanted to sort of maintain how sort of sad and sorry I am about it. But the truth was, Thom is the only love in my life, and it will always have been the only love in my life. And it was just quite unstoppable, our relationship reforming.
Now, there's been a huge debate here in the United Kingdom, but certainly not as big as in the United States, about gay marriage. It's been inside of Parliament, where it has passed, and the House of Lords has been trying to weigh in, and there have been some attempts to try and overturn it, but it looks as though the actual institution of gay marriage has been a lot easier to obtain here in the UK than perhaps in the United States. Talk a little bit about your involvement and some of the statements during that debate that you made.
Well, I've been very vocal about my support for gay marriage, well, equal marriage as I prefer to call it in the UK. And I think when Thom and I had our civil partnership in 2010, it created quite a lot of interest in the media, because Thom and I, we had our ceremony in Old Marylebone Town Hall in London, and then we had our celebrations, our reception, if you like, within the walls of the Household Cavalry, this incredible institution which is traditionally, it is the most traditional environment within the army, I guess. It's also the same place where I got beaten up in the years prior for being gay. And so we enjoyed our civil partnership within that environment, and that alone caused quite a lot of news. So when equal marriage became clearly on the cards within the UK, I was being asked again and again how I felt about it, and I was obviously then giving my support quite openly about equal marriage. And that's something that the military were never too keen on, because the military saw that as a political set of events that a soldier should not get involved with. I didn't agree at all with those sentiments. I felt as a gay person within the British military, whose civil partnership was used by the Ministry of Defence and the military to their benefit in terms of publicity, I felt like I was owed the chance to speak on the subject. And more so just because I'm gay, I think I should have an opinion on gay marriage.
Well, the interesting thing was there's a section in the book about how you eventually had to go and notify the commander of your intention to marry, because you'd be moving out of traditional barracks and into a different sort of relationship. Talk about that process and how you were, first able to go to your commanding officer for an equal marriage or equal civil partnership request, and his reaction.
Well, again, I think this then now starts to underline the change within the army amongst the men and women. In 2003, imagine if I'd have gone to that platoon sergeant with a similar request. I mean, it would have been unthinkable. But here we were 7 years, 8 years down the line, and that's right, soldiers in the army do have to ask permission to get married, and that's just a rule that's always been in place. And I spoke to my platoon sergeant at the time and said, Thom and I are thinking of having a civil partnership, we want to really sort of get the ball rolling. And he said, you need to go and speak to the squadron leader, the boss, about it, and he needs to give his blessing. So I formed a letter to the squadron leader, and it was submitted. The following day I was called into the office, and he spoke with me and asked me a few questions about my relationship with Thom, and at the end of which he just turned around and said, nothing would make me happier than to grant you permission to have this ceremony with Thom, and he congratulated me, and it was an absolutely wonderful occasion, which underlines how far forward the army had gone in a reasonably short time. It was actually 10 years since the law had changed when Thom and I had our civil partnership.
Ah, brilliant. Now, at some point in time in your military career, Soldier magazine offered to interview you, and you went in for a photo shoot and a 3-page interview. Explain why this was such a big moment. Who reads this magazine and why?
Everybody in the army reads the magazine, so it has about a readership of about 100,000 people when we consider regular soldiers and territorial army soldiers. So it's a big deal. You know, if nobody knew I was gay before that, which I'm pretty sure everyone who knew me did, but they certainly would by the time they'd finished reading that magazine that month. It wasn't soldiers' idea, it was the army's idea. The army were keen to put out a message that gay people did exist within the military, and they wanted to show positive examples of that. So I was asked to do an interview with the magazine, but it was billed originally as being quite a small deal. It certainly wasn't going to be a front pager at that time when I was asked to do it. And I went along and I did the interview, and I answered the questions very honestly, and they took some pictures of me. And then I went away. I was actually with Ryan, my boyfriend, who we spoke about a few minutes ago. I was actually with Ryan at the time, and I did the interview, and then we got on a train and we went to see a Britney Spears concert in London. So it was kind of done, and it was out of my mind. And then 3 weeks later, the magazine came out, and there it was. I was on the front page, and then there was 3 pages in the middle about my experiences within the army, and it was all a bit of a big deal. And suddenly, and it was the first time in 60 years, the 60 years history of Soldier magazine, that they'd ever put a gay person on the front cover or gone on and dealt with this issue of sexuality. So it was a big deal. And again, like my civil partnership in the years that followed, it made a lot of waves in the news because suddenly the army was showing off a gay soldier as opposed to just not really talking about sexuality. And even before that, 9 years before, they would have criminalised the soldier for being gay.
Yeah, and this all changed your life so very much, because you mentioned your mum has become quite an activist for gay rights, and your nan was first in denial about your relationship. Now, you know, she was very pleased to be part of the civil partnership. Talk a little bit about how that changed for you.
Well, I do think it set this new direction in my career off, because before then, I'd not really got involved with any activism issues or events. It was before the military were allowed to march at Gay Pride, so that hadn't occurred. So I guess it was just the time when I realised that there was a lot of interest in the story. And because of the interest in the story, and because the military were, I suppose, a little bit surprised by how much interest there was in the story too, I began to be invited to different events to represent the army, to talk about equality within the military, and I was invited to go and meet the Prime Minister and things like that. And the whole situation snowballed to the point where I was suddenly unclear what my job was in the army. Was I a tank driver, or was I a gay activist as a soldier, which is essentially what the military had me doing, I guess. But yeah, it was an interesting period, and from that, you know, the equal marriage debate happened in time, and because I'd been in this elevated position with being a gay serviceman, I was suddenly being asked for an opinion and a voice on gay marriage, and again that created more waves, and I was very pleased to be asked by an organisation called Stonewall to talk to their conference, and also to speak to youngsters in schools, which I still do today. And I'm very grateful, because without that Soldier magazine interview, I don't think I would ever be talking to young people in schools in the UK today.
Now, your last official duty, or one of your last official duties, was as a member of the Horse Guards for the royal wedding between William and Kate. Explain that whole process and how it was so bittersweet for you. You actually have a chapter called Dismounting, for leaving your horse for the last time.
I just knew as I was riding home from Buckingham Palace to the base in Knightsbridge, and the base in Knightsbridge is such the centerpiece for the entire book, for the amount of things that go on in and out of that barracks. I just knew going back into the gates at the very front, because I led the escort back. I just knew I was never going to do it again. I just knew it. It was becoming close to the time when I was due to go back on operational duties, and people were talking about Afghanistan and things like that. So I knew my time on a horse in London for now was coming to an end. But I didn't overly enjoy the prospect of having to go and fight another war anywhere and leaving Thom for a prolonged spell. And just in the final moments before I got off my horse in the base that day, I just knew it was the end. I just knew it was the beginning of the end anyway. And that's exactly how I describe it in the book. It was such a moment of... it was a standout moment in my career, and I thought, well, if you're going to go on a high, it's best to probably go now,
Well, James, I have to tell you, this has been so interesting on so many levels, and here's really wishing you and Thom the very best, and thank you for being on the program. Your story is so inspiring, and I have to say, so are you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our guest this week has been James Wharton. He's the author of Out in the Army, My Life as a Gay Soldier. James has written a truly gripping story of love of country, queen, and desire to serve in an army not always accepting of his life and choices. Wharton's experiences in the army form the bedrock to this astonishing tale, from serving in southern Iraq and with Prince Harry in Canada, to being hospitalized in a homophobic beating, to helping at the 7/7 bombings and serving at the royal wedding. His story is told right up to the point in April this year when he left the army after a 10-year commitment. It's a fabulous read, and it's published by Bite Back Publishing here in London. Now, everyone needs to press his publisher to get it out in the U.S. market tomorrow. For now, you can order it on Amazon.co.uk, Amazon.com, and it is available now as a Kindle book. It's worth it. You can follow James on Twitter at James Wharton, and you can read more about the book. It's at www.bitebackpublishing.com. That's one word. Thanks for joining us again this week on BookView TV. Tune in again next week when another author will sit across the Skype table from me and we'll once again discuss books and the craft of writing them. I'm Dennis Campbell saying thank you and wishing you a very good night.